Well, Random House Dictionary defines plagiarism as the unauthorized use or close imitation of the language and thoughts of another, and the representation of them as one's own original work. Northwestern University defines plagiarism as a failure to acknowledge the sources from which we borrow ideas, examples, words, and the progression of thought. And this definition is very important because sometimes we think that plagiarism is only when we are taking the words from someplace else and using them as our own. But it's not just the words, it's also the ideas and even the progression of thought. So even when we are attempting to paraphrase, we could plagiarize by imitating too closely the way in which the original was worded or the way in which the ideas were expressed. So I want to have us look at a little video that talks about plagiarism and how to avoid it.
Whether you're in the academic, creative, or professional world, plagiarism is all too common. But what is it exactly? According to the Oxford Dictionary, plagiarism is the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as one's own. Let's say you're writing something for the company newsletter, and you find a great article online that's full of useful information. So you take several parts of that article, change a few words around, and submit it without giving credit to the original author. That's plagiarism, and it can lead to serious consequences. In school, taking credit for someone else's work could mean you fail an assignment or class, or face disciplinary action. In the workplace, it could result in damage to your reputation, legal repercussions, or even losing your job. If you accidentally do it, such as forgetting to cite a source or misquoting someone, it can quickly get you in trouble. Luckily, we know a few strategies that'll help you avoid plagiarism. First, always cite your sources. Showing where you found your information gives credit to the original authors and helps reinforce your content. If you're quoting from a source, always quote the source's exact words. When inserting one into your work, place quotation marks around it, and be sure to include the author's name in the same sentence. When you want to discuss information from a source without quoting it directly, it's important you rewrite that information in your own words. Along with citing the source, use different language and sentence structure. Explore the source's ideas from your own perspective. This strategy can help you say something new, original, and plagiarism-free. Plagiarism can seem like an easy shortcut that'll save you time and effort, but it will only hurt you in the long run. Be clear and upfront about where you get your information, and you'll be free to create original content you can be proud of.
Our video helped us to kind of get some sense of the consequences of plagiarism and the ways in which it could be manifested, the ways in which we could get into trouble with plagiarism. So, signs of plagiarism in a paper is when information that is not common knowledge is included without any mention of a source. When style and tone of writing changes abruptly, when the tense shifts, when there is use of outdated information. So there is a thin line between the good use and bad use of sources, and we need to really make sure that we can distinguish between those two. First of all, it is good to use quotations in our work because it shows that we have studied the topic, we have some knowledge of what others have to say about it, and we need to incorporate those whenever we're doing research. However, when we get into trouble is when we don't acknowledge that the words that we are quoting have come from some particular place or some individual, and we don't make clear who that is. Using someone else's key terms is also considered, is also a good idea because, again, you're recognizing the way in which others have discussed this topic, and you're incorporating those key terms and ideas in your own writing. But when you begin to imitate a passage's structure or argument, again, without attribution, then you're running into a difficult or a problematic use of your source. It is a good idea to summarize someone else's main point. And it just becomes a problem when you're passing off that main point as if it were your own. And then again, putting someone else's words in your own words is what paraphrase is all about, but concealing the extent to which you've borrowed is where you run into problems. So why does this matter? When you plagiarize, you run the risk of academic consequences. When you plagiarize, you signal that you are not trustworthy, and then everything becomes suspect. If you plagiarize in one place, then it seems as though you're the type of person who does dishonest work. And so if you do this for a class, for example, your teacher may have a really difficult time, you know, believing that anything that you've produced is actually your own. So you don't want to get into you don't want that to become your identity. When you plagiarize, you also rob yourself of knowledge. And this is probably the most important reason why we shouldn't plagiarize. And that is because the purpose of doing research is to gain knowledge and understanding of a particular topic in a very deep way. And when you take the shortcut of plagiarizing and just sticking in a quote or citing something without giving attribution, you really rob yourself of the opportunity to learn something from what you have read or studied. And your writing about it in a research paper is the way that you demonstrate what you know as a result of the study and the research that you have done. One of the main things that you want to do is be invested in the topic that you're writing about. So a lot of times individuals plagiarize because they're just trying to get it done. They're just trying to find something to stick in their paper to make it look like they did the work. And so it's really about academic integrity and understanding the value of research for your own personal edification. We do research all the time, right? When we want to find out the best place to get our natural hair styled, or the best products to use for the type of hair that we have, or when we are looking to find a car that's good on gas and doesn't cost too much, we go out and do research. We ask questions, we look to sources that we find to be credible in order to get the information that we need in order to make a good decision or a wise choice. So if you think about the research process as that same process of discovery, and I need to find out information about this topic for some specific reason, that will begin to set you on the right path for doing the kind of work that you need to in a research paper that will make it unnecessary to plagiarize. Because what good will it do you to take a shortcut if ultimately you want to accomplish something by the end that's useful or productive in some way? So ask yourself initially, why am I doing this project? What is it for? What am I trying to accomplish? Hopefully it's not just to get a grade, because just getting a grade is not going to help you in life. The purpose for being in higher education is to get knowledge and understanding about a wide variety of topics and subjects in order to be an educated person and be able to speak knowledgeably about the things that you know. So how do you know what you know? Because you have looked into these subject areas and you have had conversations with those who are knowledgeable in those subject areas. And whatever you're doing in this research paper is intended to share what you've learned and what conclusions you have come to about that topic to another audience. It may be your teacher, it may be a group of people, it may be for your dissertation or master's thesis, and there's going to be various individuals who will be interested in your work. Whatever it is, you want to think about the end result and the goals that you have for this document. Maybe it's to solve a problem or to discover some new way of thinking about something. That should drive everything else that you do. So there's 3 steps really to avoid plagiarism. Number 1 is research. Number 2 is note-taking, and number 3 is documentation. So when we talk about doing research, first of all, we need to give ourselves time. And again, the problem with plagiarism often comes when we don't give ourselves enough time to do the work that needs to be done. It takes time. It's not hard, it just takes time. And I think that a lot of times we say, oh, research papers are hard, and so we don't do the work, or we try to avoid the work. But it's not hard. And if we are invested, if we're invested in the topic, it particularly will be time well spent. So estimate the amount of time that you think it will take, You think it'll take you a week, then give yourself 2 weeks. If you think it'll take you 2 weeks, then give yourself 4 weeks, because life happens. Look at what's happened today just with this presentation, right? You can't predict how things are going to go, what your days are going to be like. And so if you give yourself extra time to do it, you'll be less likely to run into that crunch where you need to take shortcuts. Second thing is use the library databases. We don't like to use them because we're more familiar with Google. It's so much simpler just to stick a search term in the Google search box. But the reality is we don't know what kind of credibility the sources have that we find when we do a Google search. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. You may find something valuable, but you're going to find a whole lot of other stuff as well. The thing about the library databases is they're very similar to Google, except that they come from resources and sources that have already been vetted by librarians. They have already passed the test of whether or not they are reliable, credible, sources of information from which we can draw. So we have another video, which I'll also share, on how to navigate the library resources. It's not that hard. If you're an A&M student, we have access to a wealth of sources, popular sources, newspapers and magazines, as well as academic sources and journals and that sort of thing. So depending on the kind of research you're doing, the library databases are a great source for finding what you need. And it can save yourself time in the search for quality, credible sources to use. And then you want to give yourself time to read through those sources. So finding them is the first step. Reading through them is the second step. I recommend, again, breaking your tasks down into bite-sized portions. So if you don't like to read, you're going to fall asleep after 30 minutes with a piece, then give yourself 30 minutes at a time to get through it, right? Read a chapter or an article in sections, or if you can get through an entire article in one sitting, then set it aside and come back to the next one later. As you read, though, what you want to do is kind of take note of those things that seem really important or valuable for the subject that you're writing about, underline, make little notes in the margins or in your notebook. And then once you finish reading, you want to make sure that you have a good grasp of what was said. So I recommend creating for yourself in your notes just a bit of an outline of that source. So summarize in your own words what the whole thing is about. Maybe if it's broken down into sections, you write a sentence summary of each section so that you kind of absorb it for yourself and understand it for yourself, what was said. And then, if you find that you're coming across texts that are difficult, particularly if you're doing academics research and you're going through some of those journals that have been written by experts in the field, it's not unlikely that you will come across terms and language and ways of expression that are a little dense and a little unfamiliar to you. Again, this is not a time to give up or to go back to Google, but rather reach out to your teacher. Come see one of us. Let's talk about whatever the text is that you're trying to get through, or whatever passages seem a little heavy, and see if we can push through and get some understanding rather than give up, because it may be good information that you could actually use. And what you'd want to do at that point, once you get an understanding of what was said, you want to then put that in your own words, because if you're going to use it in your paper, then of course you're going to want to express it in a way that will be clear for another audience, not you. So again, use the resources that you have. You can make an appointment with us to talk through an article that you are reading or researching for a paper, and we can help even with that. So we're not just here for help with writing, but we're here to help you with the writing process, and that is part of it. So again, you want to avoid also sloppy note-taking. As you find each source that you decide you want to do something with, at that very moment when you find it, whether it's a Word document or in your handwritten notes, you want to go ahead and transfer over the information about that source. Where did it come from? Figure out what the citation information is that you're going to need. So if you're using APA or MLA, we have another resource for how to cite those types with those styles. And you want to just go ahead and transfer that into your notes right when you find that source, that later when you go to your works cited page, you're not scrambling trying to find where'd that article go that I was reading and that I cited from. If you keep all of that in your notes in the same place, then you'll save yourself a lot of headache later. I have well, I don't know if you all can see it. I have an example in the PowerPoint when you get it of the way that you might structure your notes when you're finding information in a source. In your notes, you want to again have those summaries of the passages that you've read, those, I'm going to put this in my own words, here's what I think this author is saying. But also in your notes, you want to respond to those ideas that are expressed. How does that connect to your thesis? What does that help you to understand or know? Or in what ways does what this author is saying, go against what you thought about this topic? In your notes, you need to think about, well, this is completely different from anything I've ever heard before. You may need to look at other sources to see if they're saying the same thing. It's a conversation. A lot of times I think we assume that the sources we find are the authority and we just have to put them in our paper somehow. But the reality is they are the authority to some extent, but the question is, how does what they are sharing in their work, what does that have to do with the point that you're making? Or what does that have to do with the subject matter and the way that you're dealing with it? You are the authority of your own paper. So the question is, how does this information add to what I'm saying, agree with what I'm saying, or disagree? And if it disagrees in some way, don't toss it aside, because sometimes when we're writing argument papers, we want to just throw out everything that doesn't say what we believe. But the question is, how does this person's perspective or view on this subject, how does it compare to your own? You may be able to incorporate those sources in such a way to show your reader that here are the various views on this, and here's where my opinion is, or my perspective is on that, and for these particular reasons. That's really the work that a research paper is meant to do. And there's another presentation that we have on the lit review, which is sort of the way to kind of pull all the different views together when you're beginning a research paper, so that you position your perspective in relation to that of others. And I can share that with you as well. So, and I want to make sure that we are clear about what we mean when we say the word cite. A lot of times when we hear, be sure to cite your sources, we think only about the works cited page or the reference page that comes at the very end of the paper. But again, if you think about what you're doing in your research paper, when you incorporate the words or ideas of another, you are signaling the conversation that you are having on this topic with all the various sources that you have looked at that are talking about the same thing. So when we talk about citing in the paper, what we actually are talking about is signaling to your reader, here's what this other person has said. So you need those introductory phrases, according to this author, so-and-so argues, and that's sort of language that signals where you are going to begin borrowing. And maybe it's a quote that follows, maybe it's a paraphrase or a summary, but that signaling phrase is part of the citation. Then when you have finished, whether it's a quote, paraphrase, or summary, once you've finished borrowing the ideas that came from that source, the cite also includes that end text citation, which might be a page number. If it's APA, it would be the author and year. But it's a way to help your reader know where the ideas are coming from, and at what point you stop using something that someone else has said and begin to talk about something from your own voice. Then the third thing that is included when we talk about citing is the actual reference page. And what you put in the body of the paper, in the text, in-text citation, points directly to what is on that reference page. So if in your paper you say, according to John Doe, this, this, and this, and then in the parentheses you have his last name and the year, I'm going to be looking on your reference page for John Doe, just as you cited it in text. And all of that, so those two things have to kind of point back to one another, and will help me to know at what point you use the source and at what point you stop using the source, and then also where I can find that source myself, which is also the purpose of the reference page or works cited page, is to provide your reader with all of the information that they need in order to find that source in the same way that you did. All right, so there's various kinds of plagiarism. Sometimes we think it's only when we quote something without mentioning the author. But plagiarism is copying word for word. It's merging the words or ideas of another with our own, kind of back and forth, without signaling at what point, again, the ideas are borrowed. And it's also when you say, according to John Doe, and then you are off to the races and you never say again where you stop borrowing from John Doe. It's just like that one citation and then you're done, and we never hear about that person again. So it's not clear where you stopped using that source. Again, that is also plagiarism. It's considered insufficient acknowledgement. And then there's the paraphrase plagiarism, which is basically an attempt to paraphrase where you don't actually paraphrase. And so sometimes that's a little tricky. A good way to, the best way to paraphrase. So I have a video. Hopefully we will be able to see it. I'm going to try to share my screen again so that we can watch it together.
The skill of paraphrasing doesn't need to be scary or frustrating. In fact, good paraphrasing is a sign of good learning. Once you know that and realize that writing a good paraphrase takes time, you'll begin to love it. Well, okay, at least appreciate it. Now, you may have heard about paraphrasing in relation to another word. Should I even say it? It's plagiarism. Wait a minute. Don't be afraid. Though being a good paraphraser can help you avoid plagiarism, it means more than that. First, let's define paraphrasing. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary online, a paraphrase is a restatement of a text, passage, or work, giving the meaning in another form. In other words, you are processing a quote, so the idea remains the same, but it is shared in your own unique way, kind of like the way tomatoes are processed into ketchup. If we think about it that way, potato chips are kind of like paraphrases of potatoes, and hot dogs are paraphrases of, I'm not really sure. Anyway, the near cousin of paraphrasing is summarizing. They both involve restating an author's ideas. However, summarizing condenses the material, while paraphrasing retains all of the ideas. As a result, paraphrases are approximately the same length as your original quote, while summaries are shorter. Now, you might ask, why not just quote everything? Let's talk about a few reasons. If you include too many quotes, your paper will sound like a mashup of too many other people's voices. Paraphrasing allows your writing to keep a consistent style. Also, when writers paraphrase, they demonstrate true understanding of another's ideas. That's why paraphrasing involves more than changing a few words and adding synonyms. Being able to express an author's ideas in your own voice shows that you have truly learned the material. Some people might even say it's just bad writing to always use someone else's words instead of finding your own voice. Now hold on. This doesn't mean you can't quote. Sometimes you simply can't paraphrase effectively without changing the meaning. So in that case, you can quote. Other times, the way the idea is stated is so authoritative that it would diminish the meaning if you paraphrased. Lastly, if you're using literature or primary sources, your reader may want to see the original words, in addition to your analysis of it. So in those cases, it's totally fine to quote. Now, here's a few things you'll want to consider when paraphrasing. Make sure not to add your own opinion or change the meaning of the author's idea. You'll have plenty of time to comment on, disagree with, and analyze the author's ideas after the paraphrase ends. When you quote, it's easy for the reader to see when another person's idea ends and your analysis begins. But how does your reader know that the paraphrase is over? Yep, you guessed it, an in-text citation. As I mentioned before, make sure you digest the idea thoroughly and put it into your own words. The language and sentence structure should be your own. That is why paraphrases take a while to write, but that's also why they show how well you know the material. Lastly, a blend of paraphrase and the author's words can be used, but don't forget to put the exact words in quotation marks. The best way to improve your paraphrasing is to practice. So let me get it out of the way so you can give it a try. Here's a quote taken from page 26 of a book by an author whose last name is Davis. If the existence of a signing ape was unsettling for linguists, It was also startling news for animal behaviorists. Now, let's take a look at a sample paraphrase. An ape who knew sign language unsettled linguists and startled animal behaviorists. So, what do you think of this paraphrase? You're totally right. There are words used directly from the original sentence. It doesn't look like the writer really processed and learned the idea in the original quote. So let's try this again. If the presence of a sign language using chimp was disturbing for scientists studying language, it was also surprising to scientists studying animal behavior. You've got a good eye. Even though the words are different, the sentence resembles the original quite a bit in how it's put together. I know we could do much better than that. What do you think of this one? When they learned of an ape's ability to use sign language, both linguists and animal behaviorists were taken by surprise. Yep, you got it. That's much more like it. What a fine-looking paraphrase.
All right. So the important thing that was in that video is that sometimes we attempt to paraphrase when in actuality we are just switching synonyms for words. And I've actually heard that many grade school teachers, middle school, high school teachers taught paraphrase that way, that you just switch out the words in the original for synonyms of those words. That is unfortunate because that is absolutely incorrect and not the way to paraphrase at all. As she demonstrated in the video, paraphrase is where you, again, like when I was sharing in your notes, what you should be doing as you read each of your sources, you should be understanding it for yourself so that you can say it in your own way. And so what I often advise is when you're paraphrasing or wanting to paraphrase something, think about what the meaning is and then say it in your own way. How would you explain what this author means to someone who, let's say, is younger than you or who isn't in the same class and would have no way of knowing what that is or what was meant by that? If you understand it for yourself, then you would be able to say it in your own way to someone else. And that's what you're aiming for when you're doing a paraphrase, is saying what the idea is that was expressed in the original, but saying it in your own words or in a way that you understand it and that you would be able to help someone else to understand it as well. In the PowerPoint that I'm sending out, there is a couple of paraphrase activities that will help to reinforce the ideas that were expressed in the video we just watched. And so you can kind of get a sense of what we mean by doing a true paraphrase. And before we close out, I want to just test your knowledge a little bit. I'll let each of you unmute yourself. Let me make sure everyone is unmuted so that we can avoid all the background noise. So help me out here. I want to know if copying all or part of a paper from a book is plagiarism. Yes or no?
Yes.
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 What about turning in a paper someone else wrote with your name on it?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. What about buying a paper from a research assistance company?
No.
Is that plagiarism?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
What about downloading materials from the internet?
If it's unsighted, then yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. What about using the same paper from one class that you wrote for another class?
Yes.
Is that plagiarism?
Surprisingly, yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm glad y'all said that. I've had many students go, no, that's not plagiarism. I wrote it. So tell me why is that plagiarism?
Let's say since a body of work was already submitted for a particular assignment, resubmitting the same work, I guess, is still looked at as plagiarism. Like you would have to quote yourself almost because you've already submitted that body work. It's almost like it's been quote unquote published in a sense.
Right. Yeah. And it falls under the category of academic integrity, right? It's are you being true to the assignment that's been given and honest with the work that you're presenting in it? And if you want to borrow something that you stated elsewhere, like you said, just cite that. You know, I've seen authors say, you know, I have said elsewhere, blah, 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 right? Or and on their works cited page or reference page, they would have the document where they stated that particular thing. So it's just really being true to, again, helping your reader understand where the information has come from and not trying to take shortcuts for the work that you're doing presently. And you know, there's absolutely a way to say again what you've said before, but just acknowledging that it was stated before is really the key for yourself, and then of course when you're citing others as well. So what about allowing a friend or writing center consultant to rewrite phrases, sentences, or paragraphs for you? Is that plagiarism?
Yes.
Okay, somebody tell me why. Because I thought the writing center was supposed to be here to help you.
Okay, you said the writing center.
I would say, like, if they're the ones who are doing it for you and you're not actually putting the work in to do it, then yeah, it'll be plagiarism.
Yes, that's the key. It's not that writing center consultants can't help you with the wording or phrasing or the ideas, but the question is who did the work? Who's the one who actually put the words on the page? And, you know, working with writing center consultants or your roommate or friend or a teacher who's helping you and having a conversation about the subject and saying, oh, that's a good way to say it, I'm going to write that down, that is fine. But it's when you kind of push your paper over and say, hey, just write what you just said on that paper, that sounds good, where it gets to be problematic. So certainly, again, the work that we do is to kind of help you with those ideas and to give you some ideas for ways to say it, but it still has to be your own. And so you want to maintain ownership of everything that you do. You don't want to pass it off for someone else to do for you. Again, you don't want to buy or purchase things off of the internet or cut and paste things directly from elsewhere, because again, it's about your work, your study, your understanding of the subject matter, and how are you sharing that in a particular way for this particular assignment. That's the bottom line, guys. And I know it has been a hard road to get to the end of this presentation, but by golly, we made it. So what I want to just remind you is that we have a website that is on the A&M University main page. If you just go to www.aamu.edu/writing center. You'll find us. All of our resources are there. We have lots of good stuff out there for you. You can also follow us on Facebook at capital THE Right Place AAMU, and Instagram is Right Place AAMU. So we post updates in those places also. Our upcoming workshops and all the things that we have available are always there. And you can email us to our Gmail, which is the Writing Center AAMU@gmail.com. So if you have any questions, and we will also, I know the university is switching to a remote phone system so that we can actually take your phone calls too. So we'll make sure we send that out once all of that is set up so that you can contact us if you need to or have any questions. Before I close out, I do want to give you all the opportunity to ask any questions. If there was anything that I kind of breezed through that I didn't make clear, or that you had a question about that maybe I didn't cover, feel free to ask any of those questions now.
A quick question about quoting yourself. So in your body of work, I know you said you can reference like in a previous, I don't know, paper I've mentioned, blah, blah, blah. Do you still have to apply a citation? And if you do, when citing that previous paper, would it be like any other, you know, like your last name and the date that you completed the year that you completed that paper? Is that kind of like, does it still work the same?
Yes. So pretty much whatever style of documentation you use, the basic patterns will always apply to some extent, regardless of the type of source that it is. But yes, the short answer to your question is yes. If you're citing, what you want to do is go to the Purdue OWL and look up how to cite for APA or MLA, and they will have examples for, I think they have it under the category of unpublished works or something to that effect, and they'll tell you specifically what information you would need. But yeah, basically it's going to be your last name, first name, the year that the paper was written and published or what have you, and then some other things dependent on the type of thing, if it was a presentation or if it was a seminar paper or that sort of thing. Those particular details would be included as well, but it's per the style documentation that you're using.
Right. But you still cite in your body of work, like how you would do in any other format. Okay.
Yes, except that in your paper, as you're talking about it, you might not say, Kim Roper says, because you're also Kim Roper who's writing the paper, right? But you might say, I said elsewhere, or in a recent seminar paper for such and such and such class, it was stated that, if you can't use the first person, you would do it in the same way.
Thank you so much for answering that.
Sure, no problem. Any other questions before we close out?
Question, do we follow the most recent APA citing, or because she sees that it recently changed?
Yes, so we indicate in the presentation that we did a couple weeks ago, we talked about what some of those changes are, but what will guide you as to which style to use is what your professor requires. So some professors kind of stick with the way it was done before. They don't transition immediately to the new version when it comes out. They may wait a semester or even a year before they start requiring that. So you want to ask your professor, if you're doing a paper for a class, whether they are following the new APA guidelines or whether they're using the old ones, and then you would go by that. If you're writing for some other purpose, for say a professional purpose, or submitting to a conference or something like that, I would suggest using the new version of APA, or check with whatever the organization is that you're submitting to see what their requirements are. But we do, in our presentation, talk about the newer version of APA and what some of those particulars are. And if you go to Purdue OWL, they have the newest, the latest version of APA, but they also have a little link for if you're needing to follow the previous version as well, because sometimes it takes a little while for everyone to get on board with the new one. All right, I think that's it. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.